Hello everybody, my name's James, and for the benefit of those listening on the audio, you're listening to Ask James, my regular YouTube live stream where I welcome questions from the YouTube community on anything football related. To timestamp this, it's just gone 12 p.m. on Friday, July the 14th, 2023, and we are under a month away from the return of Premier League football and therefore Fantasy Premier League and Sky Fantasy football. Let's get straight into the questions. Lewis Browning, my friend, says, morning mate, hope you're good. What part of watching Spurs in pre-season under Ange intrigues you most? Good question. I think the most intriguing thing I think for pre-season is different, something new. Can he or does he want to give real chance to any of the good crop of youngsters who might not be quite ready? We'll find out the squad names who are going to go on tour today. I'm hoping, by the way, to see many of those who don't at Enfield Town on Tuesday night, if anyone fancies joining me to watch the under-21s, subject to weather, which is awful here today. But can people like Alfie Devine get a chance? Can they become regular members of the squad next year? Obviously, new players, so I think the most exciting thing of all is to see James Maddison. Is there a preference for him to be right half space, left half space? We don't know the answer. I'm very intrigued from a fantasy perspective to understand the impact on Heung-min Son. Is he going to have to hold the touchline? Is he going to be allowed to come in off the touchline? I'm fascinated by Dejan Kulusevski as well, in the sense that I have an inkling that Postecoglou would like to try him in a more central area. Perhaps with Maddison. It might sound excessive, but I can foresee a Tottenham in certain games playing with Bissouma, Maddison and Kulusevski as a midfield three, and that's going to be very different to midfield threes we might have seen under Antonio Conte. Might have been like Skip Højbjerg, Bentancur, for example. So there's a lot I'm interested by. The inversion of fullbacks, which we think is going to happen, although the fullbacks at Tottenham, in the likes of Desni Udogie and particularly Pedro Porro, are more like flyers in terms of you want them to go down the wing. So I think we might get some variations from what we've seen from Postecoglou at Celtic. Excited, really am, Lewis. I've got to be honest. And it's interesting because this time last year, I think we were quite excited about Tottenham with the business we've been doing in the transfer window as well. And in fairness, as I always say, the football we played in the March to May period of 2022 was excellent. We were playing some extremely good, primarily counter-attacking football, it must be said, but some extremely good football. And obviously that didn't last. And I think most people generally go into pre-season optimistic. And fantasy managers should be aware of that when they speak to club fans, that from the 20 clubs in the league, I'd imagine that the majority of them are pretty optimistic going into the season. Which fan base currently wouldn't be optimistic going into the new season? Everton? Wolves? Might be a little bit concerned at Fulham maybe at the moment. Crystal Palace have obviously looked like they're going to lose Zaha. Elise's injured, not done anything particularly other than the sign of Jefferson Lerma. Maybe Palace. But the rest are probably pretty optimistic about things at the moment, and there isn't real reason not to be. Even the promoted clubs, speak to a Luton or Sheffield United fan, I'm sure they'd be quite realistic about their expectations this year, but they'll fight their corner for their reasons of why they can stay up, even if the majority are writing them off, right? So most people are optimistic at the moment, and I'm no different until I see Tottenham next week, and very much looking forward to that first game against West Ham in Australia on Tuesday lunchtime. Holostamo says, great job with the Saudi podcast, one of my favourites so far. Obviously Saudi podcasts, so we've been doing a week long of podcasts theme related on Saudi Arabia on our Patreon network this week, with the last one called The Goal, which will go out for patrons probably around about 3 p.m-ish, 3:30 today. Yeah, we've enjoyed doing it as well. There's been a lot of chat that's been non-football, and exploring a lot of the detail around the Saudi kingdom. We've obviously discussed links like PIF to Newcastle and our Chelsea involved there, and the inflation of the transfer market, historical look at football in Saudi Arabia, the wages players are learning. I think we've just about across the week covered off all corners. We knew that one podcast wasn't going to suffice, so we did 5, and we've really enjoyed doing it as well, and I think Suj particularly has as well. 9 Tank 7 says, morning James, would you rather win Sky or FPL. Lastly, how do you eat Maltesers? How do I eat Maltesers? Put them in my mouth and bite them? is that the wrong answer? Is there a right or wrong way to eat Maltesers? I'm to be honest, I'm probably not one at a time, if that's what you're asking. I'm a multiple. You know, like, what's all that about? You open a pack of Pringles and you go one at a time. No one does that, do they? Or is it just me? Because I'm a bit of a monster. I do love my food. I don't think there's a wrong way to eat Maltesers. Maltesers would be more acceptable to me at one at a time than a Pringle, for example. But yeah, I'm probably not one at a time. Would I rather win Sky or FPL? I mean, that's the easiest question I'll get all season, mate. It's Sky. It's £50,000 prize for winning Sky. What do I get? A goodie bag for winning FPL and the acclaim of well done and some tickets. I go to most Tottenham games anyway, so but I would, for those, I would ask for Bournemouth away, I'd ask for Luton away, the games that I probably wouldn't get tickets for, where most people be like, oh, I want the Manchester Derby or the Merseyside Derby or whatever. I'd want the games that I thought I couldn't get Tottenham tickets for, like Bournemouth would be a great example. So 100% Sky. The money, that's £50,000, can do a lot for my family, right? FPL, win it, great, and nothing changes in my life. Life goes on, though. Listen, obviously, the prestige of winning FPL would obviously be incredible. It's also completely unrealistic to win FPL. Someone will, obviously, but Sky is realistic. We sat down with Paul McAnulty, who won Sky Fantasy, the day after he won it, sat in the studio upstairs with us. So, yeah, definitely Sky by miles. Tom Glover says, is it as important to hold chips this season with less chance of big blanks and doubles? Considering a free hit in game week 2 to pile into Liverpool, I don't fancy either side of that game. So obviously Liverpool start with a game at Chelsea, which is obviously quite unpredictable at the start, with obviously Pochettino taking over Chelsea. Then there's a trip to Newcastle, and Aston Villa visit Anfield in game week 4 and performed very well at Anfield in game week 37 last year. The first thing that stands out, Tom, is that I certainly wouldn't free hit on the basis of 3 players. So unless you can identify other things that you particularly want in game week 2 that you don't want in game week 1, it's a complete no-go. And I think particularly for a club like Liverpool, in the sense that, say with Mo Salah, how many times have we seen it over the years that he returns in the big games, in the big moments? So Trent, similarly, I think off the top of my head, Trent and Mo Salah, I can visualise them both scoring goals at Stamford Bridge historically as examples. So that wouldn't be a reason to free hit. Absolutely not. In relation to the chips, I do think, and we'll do a chip strategy podcast on the 24th of July, which is a Monday, where we'll discuss things like using chips earlier on. There is a case to say that, yes, there might not be big doubles this year. There certainly will be double game weeks. There'll be at least 3. That's almost a certainty. And there'll certainly be a few blanks. There'll be at least, well, I say at least, it's subject to at least one Premier League team getting to the Carabao Cup final or / FA Cup semi-final. There'll be at least 3 blanks, most likely 4, because we think we're going to lose City and Brentford from game week 18. So there will be opportunities, but the idea of a double game week with 14 teams doubling doesn't seem likely at the moment. But you only need enough good ones, I think. And plus, the biggest one could well be game week 37. So if you're setting up for the bench boost for that, it's a very late wild card, isn't it? And a lot of us sort of went with was it game week 29 or 30 last year? I can't remember one or the other, which is earlier. And then you obviously play with what you've got for the run-in as well. So there is a case with a lot of the chips to play them earlier. The one I would definitely say don't use early is the triple captaincy chip, because definitely that opportunity best will come later in the season. The most likely for that City Brentford game in game week 18, by the way, is probably game week 20, which would give City a double of Sheffield United at home and Brentford at home. And yeah, that could be the end of the triple captaincy debate. But we'll look at some alternatives to that in case that eventuality doesn't happen. And I wouldn't put that any more than sort of 50-50 at the moment. But yeah, I wouldn't use the triple captaincy early. I know a few people over the years have spoke about bench boost in game week 1, and if there was a year, I don't hate it, purely in the sense that there's a few with enabling assets who you really could put in quite early and pick a team of 15. I'd probably want a wild card quite quickly out of it, but Yeah, it's a policy I've always been really against, bench boosting in game week 1, because I'm a stickler for using it in doubles later in the season. But because the best one is probably going to be so late this year, yeah, I don't hate it. And there's some fixtures there that you could potentially take advantage of early on. You look at like Palace away at Sheffield United, and then they've got like Arsenal and Brentford away afterwards. But the opening day, yeah, fine. And similarly, you can put Sheffield United players into that category. Bournemouth, West Ham have terrible starts, but play each other game week 1. Also offer opportunities, for example. So yeah, it's not impossible to look at that for one. But generally speaking, Tom, as a rule of thumb, hold back. Colm Bugler says, hi James, don't forget to hit the like, people. Thank you, Colm. Yeah, smash a like, hit the sub button if you're in live on the chat. Any other Fulham players Spurs interested in? Question, apart from Moussa Dembele, can you think of any others that improved for the move? A disgruntled Fulham fan, is that disgruntled because, I mean, I mentioned might be one, not really any business done yet, and obviously big links this week about Mitrovic possibly looking to move to Saudi Arabia. Players who've left Fulham and done particularly well. No, I mean, we've also had Ryan Sessegnon off you, haven't we? It was interesting. I was looking at something that a good friend of ours, Dan FPL Chancer, posted the other day about. I think he's played 38 Premier League games. That obviously includes substitute appearances since Tottenham bought him in 2019, 4 years. And I think in his last 2 seasons for Fulham, he played over 70 league games across the 2 seasons, which did include 1 year in the Championship, admittedly. But yeah, it's nearly double in those last 2 years at Fulham to what he's appeared in at Tottenham in 4. So, and he's obviously picked up another hamstring injury. Players who've left Fulham and done really well. I can't think of too many off the top of my head. We had Clint Dempsey off you as well. Oh, I couldn't stand him. His goals record wasn't bad, but God, he was poor. But Moussa, yeah, what a player. Anybody who's listened to me over the years will know I could spend the next 45 minutes talking about Moussa Dembele. So I'll move on. Paul Murray says, looking at 5 million midfield differentials options for my bench in a 4-4-2, 3-4-3. Love your opinion on Keane Lewis Potter, please. Potential there to lock down a left wing spot, I reckon, under the radar. Kevin Sade, a little bit more, might be another player who's quite under the radar at the moment. My one concern with him and also with Lewis Potter, and it does apply to Brentford, is that we know in some of the more difficult fixtures, they tend to move to a back 5. And I think the favoured 2 at the moment would probably be Mbeumo and Vissa to play the 2. There aren't too many of those fixtures that probably cause alarm at the start, but there's enough. So in the build-up to the Tottenham game in game week 37 last year, I suggested that I thought, because Tottenham were quite weak at that point, that Brentford probably would play a back 4. That might be different in game week 1 this season. Newcastle away in 5, United away in 8, and Chelsea away in 10. They probably play a back 5. But then you're probably more interested in those other fixtures where they primarily play a 4 anyway. I would think if the season started tomorrow, Brentford's front 3 would probably be Sade, Vissa and Mbeumo. That would be my take. I think Lewis Potter was quite unlucky last year. Obviously had some injury problems. We've obviously got Damsgaard is a part of that group now, who they actually brought on into the midfield 3 during that game at White Hart Lane in 37, but can obviously play in that role further forward as well. And we don't know if there's an intention for the club to invest in another forward because of obviously Ivan Toney being suspended until January. So Lewis Potter would be, in all honesty, would be miles away from my radar at the moment. But he's one of a number of players who will obviously hope to have a better second part of the season. In terms of 5 million midfielders, I don't think there's much there. If you're looking for it as a rotational option, my advice would probably be at the moment, jump up to the 5.5s, which then feels a lot for rotational. Or to be honest, just pick someone at the 4.5 valuation and forget about it. And I'm sure between now and the season starting, I've spoken about this previously, that something at 4.5 midfield or 4.0 defence will stand out more than it does now. For example, Malo Gusto at Chelsea is a great example of a player we've not spoken about much. There's some suggestion yesterday that Reece James might be having a scan on a potential knee injury. We think it's just precautionary, to be honest. But should Reece James miss out game week 1, Gusto probably plays at 4.0 and he'd be the 1, wouldn't he? So don't ever think it too much at the moment, would be what I'd say. Mr. Tool says, hi James, for Sky Fantasy you mentioned it being a 9-man game with Lewis Dunk being one. Who was the other locked-in player? That's a very fairly obvious Erling Haaland answer, my friend. Ian from Melbourne says, good day James, hope you and the family are well. What did you study at uni? Oh, God. Women, drugs. Not drugs, mum. Alcohol. And were you able to get to all the home away games you wanted? And how did Spurs end up loaning Andy Bove? My goodness. So at university, I did sport and fitness studies. And other than the first year where I stayed at uni, which was only in Luton, so it's not far, right? I had then commuted to uni rather than the other way round because it was doable. You just go King's Cross train. It's not too bad. You had to leave the house pretty early, sort of 7 a.m, but it could be done. And I preferred that because of Tottenham, but you know, my life was here in London. It wasn't there. In terms of home and away games, yeah, I'd never missed a home game, no doubt. Away games didn't go to as much then because affordability, right, as a student, etc. And also back then it wasn't difficult to get the 3 p.m. games. Most of the pubs would have the 3 p.m. games, so you could see them. So at that period in the noughties, didn't go to nowhere near as many away games as I go to now, for example. How did Tottenham end up with Andy Bove? Tottenham ended up with Andy Bove as a loan in January in early 2001 because we had a crisis with our forwards. We had a number on the books. We had Sergei Rebrov, Les Ferdinand, Chris Armstrong, Stefan Everson. I think from memory at the time, Rebrov was the only one who was fit and he wasn't exactly firing. So Tottenham decided to do a short-term deal while some of these other forwards got fit. And of course, back then it was regularly 2 up front as it was for the majority of teams. So yeah, Tottenham were in need because they had no cover. And he ended up playing 3 or 4 games. Didn't score. He nearly scored in a game at West Ham. Ended 0-0. And we had a big period over that time. We had 4 out of 5 games finished 0-0 under George Graham, which Rebrov ironically ended with a 90th minute winner away to a very average Manchester City, who I pretty sure got relegated at the end of that season. Frederick Hertz says, can you talk a bit about how ownership affects your choices, both regarding the highly owned and differentials and when choosing between assets from the same team? That's a really good question. So I think there's a balancing act where it's important to take things on an individual case by case. So all of us, I think, are conscious of the potential loss of value and also looking to gain value at the start of the season, and we should consider those sort of things. So with someone like Haaland, if we want him, you don't be put off by the number in his ownership. You're almost more scared by it. I think with the other, it's talk about sort of like the Stupiñans and Sakas. So there are alternatives there. You can have a 4.5 defender. Something that will probably become clearer with, say, an Adam Webster by the time the season starts. And of course, with Arsenal, there's alternatives to Saka and the likes of Odegaard, Martinelli, Kai Havertz, Jesus up front. There's certainly a lot of alternatives there if you don't want to go for the ownership. But I think we saw last year that with Haaland, who was, I want to say about 50%-ish, that if you have the player and does well, that ownership can still grow really higher, right? I mean, look at how Kieran Trippier's ownership ended up absolutely huge, monstrous, right? So I wouldn't be too put off, but there are other examples where I would maybe pick the player with the lower ownership. So to give an example, let's say Saliba and Gabriel at Arsenal, both 5.0. Let's say you want one of them. I think Gabriel's ownership is, I wouldn't say significantly more than Saliba at the moment, but enough to make me think I would maybe just go Saliba because I think it's a coin flip between those two in any case. Similarly, I think someone like Sven Botman is avoidable at the moment. Do I think Sven Botman will be a good FPL asset this season? Yes. 4.5 is too cheap. That's why his ownership's so high. But his ownership is high enough that I think all it will take is 1 or 2 other 4.5s to perform very well, and the movement will be there. Newcastle's first 4 fixtures is pretty rough. I think a lot of us are thinking, well, I'll come back for Botman when he's 4.3 or 4.4. Unless he hits the ground running those opening 4, which is unlikely, he's probably, his ownership, going to lose some value, and I'd be conscious of that. Similarly, Tyrone Mings at Aston Villa, half the ownership, still at around about 16%, but enough comfortably more than the other Villa 4.5s, of which we've now got Pau Torres at that price, whose ownership might come down quite a bit, that I would say someone like that is completely avoidable. Amari Bell at Luton, 4.0. There are other 4.0 options that I would not want to go with a 22% owned Luton defender at the start when there are alternatives. Now, if Bell was 3-4% owned, perfect. What I'd say is I wouldn't go with the very lowest ownership, because then that doesn't take many transfers out to lose. You look for something middle ground. Similar theory I'd apply to the 4.5. So I think from memory, Sam Surridge might be the most owned 4.5 at the moment. At over 10%, I'd probably say avoid that at the moment. He's behind. He's clearly behind Awoniyi, Chris Wood. They can play Gibbs White through the middle, Johnson, Emmanuel Dennis. They may add to the squad. That's avoidable. He's got a bit of ownership based on the minutes he gained and points scored last season. I'd rather have something in the middle ground. I wouldn't want the guy who's got the very least ownership. I'd want something in the middle. Unless, of course, as we've said, like a Cameron Archer or a Balogun moves to one of these clubs and looks like it's going to start every week, then sure, get that guy. But for those who it's just like, oh, he's going to be 1 pointers, I'd get something sort of middle ground. And similarly, I think there's 4.5 defenders. You have to remember, if you're competing with 100 and 150 other players, so unless they're one of the top scoring 4.5 defenders near the start, the ownership will move. Historically, that's what always happens at the start in FPL. He scored points, move to him. So in our bubble of engagement, fine. Others will look at it and go, whoa, he's the highest scoring 4.5 defender. I'll have him. That's the logic. The fixtures and all that becomes irrelevant. If there's a Fulham defender, for example, who, let's say Tim Ream scores 30 points in the first 2 game weeks, right? And he scores and he keeps a clean sheet in those first 2 games at Everton and Brentford. People will steam into him, irrespective of the fact that their next 2 games are Arsenal away and Manchester City away. I know that will happen. We know that will happen from historical evidence. So I'd be conscious of ownership. But you have to treat them all on individual cases, subject to the price, I think. Stephen Moore says, hi James, do you think the 6.0 forwards are being overlooked to help fit in Trent and Salah? Surely one of Visser, Ferguson, Calvert-Lewin, Antonio emerges. Rotating Sisso and a 4.5 defender, and it becomes manageable. You'll be seeing more look at it, I think. I think the key one of the standouts there is down to fitness and rotation concerns on all of these players. So Visser at Brentford, with Sade at 5.5 midfielder and Mbumo 6.5 midfielder, feels avoidable, I think, at the moment. Ferguson, obviously, if he's going to play regular enough, great, but you've got big competition there with Welbeck. They bought João Pedro. Inciso can obviously also play that position. You might even see Adam Lallana, if he's fit, playing that position. There's plenty of competition there. With Calvert-Lewin and Antonio's obviously got the competition of a fit against Shamaka, we should be conscious of. And Danny Ings being there means that he's never likely, Antonio, to play sort of more than 70 minutes or so, even if he's a starter. Whereas Calvert-Lewin's got the fixtures at the start. If he's got the fitness to go with it, he's probably the one. But we've got to see a good pre-season from Dominic Calvert-Lewin to feel comfortable and safe to think that we'd go there. So he's not a player I could commit to now, but if he goes into that Fulham game looking fit and ready, he won't be discounted. With Antonio and the others, I'd need to feel a little bit more confident in what's happening minute-wise. Evan Ferguson has an explosiveness that I think allows for more rotation than the others, let's say. And there are some decent fixtures for Brighton at the start. In terms of those first 3, Luton at home, Wolves away, West Ham at home, if you said to me now he was going to get circa 160, 170 minutes from those 3, which is less than 2 a game, I'd still deem that maybe okay. But I don't want to invest in a guy who's going to get 1 start from that, for example. Kind of needs to be at least 2. Frederick Hertz also says, considering starting his Stupinan and shift him to Chilwell in round 3, should I just start Chilwell? The thing is, when you land, if a Stupinan has the first 2, this is what these questions you have to ask yourself. Let's say a Stupinan performs really well in those first 2, could do, and his ownership increases and it gets towards 60%, and then he's coming into West Ham at home. You brave enough to sell? That's the point. We had another example of one. I think it was someone asked last week about selling a Manchester United player in game week 3. And I said similar. I said, you're about to walk into Manchester United, got Nottingham Forest at home. So consider what's your alternative if you don't want to move at that point. And I think particularly in the case of United player, say a Rashford to, say, Sterling has emerged, then you probably don't want to do that just based on the fixture. So I think it's worth saying overall, by the way, that my take is that because there aren't obvious wildcard moments at this stage in terms of, a Manchester United swing or a Chelsea swing, we've had these in the past, that attacking the fixtures, because so many of those midfielders are so well priced, attacking the fixtures does seem like a good strategy, and that's obviously what you're thinking about in terms of skipping Chelsea against Liverpool, West Ham, buying for Luton. Of course, I get the logic. I'm just saying someone like Estupiñán is going to be quite a difficult sell. That said, I can also understand why people want to wait before they invest in Chelsea, because it might not be Chilwell that you want. It might be that it's Reece James. It might be that one of the 4.5 central defenders looks an absolute lock and it's better just going that way and saving the money. Or James is injured and Gusto's playing every week and we look at him. So I can certainly understand the wanting to watch and wait. Hopefully pre-season with Chelsea is going to give us some clues. As I've said so many times, I think they're the most important team to watch in pre-season is Chelsea. Adam English says, Dele man, heartbroken, what a brave soul. Very glad I was working from home watching that interview. How did it resonate with you? Awful. And I did a little piece for our advanced tiers straight afterwards, and I shouldn't have done it. Purely because I didn't speak. I watched it and then I recorded this short piece of audio about it, and I should have spoke to someone before I did that. Fine, obviously, I'm not ashamed to say I literally sat exactly where I'm sitting right now, and very difficult not to well up watching that, and to understand what he's gone through. And I think even most neutrals were probably genuinely seriously affected if you've watched it, and you should all watch it. Don't read the stories about it where it gets sensationalized. Watch all of it. And Gary Neville does very well as a host, who obviously knows Ali from worked with him in 2016. I keep saying Ali out of habit. We should just call him Dele these days, shouldn't we? He was to me, we've got Ali, Dele Alli, as a song, and it used to wrap around White Hart Lane like something you wouldn't believe in terms of noise. Even the first game at the new stadium, half hour before kickoff, the ground was bouncing, singing his name. And as I said in that piece yesterday, he was such a symbol of that Tottenham under Pochettino, that it made it even harder to watch, because someone that I really care about. And I've long defended Dele, primarily because of the injuries, the 2 serious hamstring injuries he had. I know really affected his mobility, and I'm surprised actually that he didn't speak about injuries impacting him and the effect that may have had on his mental health. And listening to a podcast Ledley King did on Tottenham's channels with Michael Dawson about the difficulty for Dele not being able to train and stuff, and how that impacted him mentally. And I'm sure for Dele there was some difficult moments where he couldn't play football, and it probably bothered him, and he sought resources elsewhere, etc. So what he's done now, he's opened up doors for, as he said himself, if this helps one person, then it's successful. And that's the same when I would say my DMs are open, not open for me to look at your FPL teams. Thoughts. You want people to give thoughts, put it on Twitter, open it up to everybody. We've all got the same budget, etc. at the moment. My DMs remain open for people to come and talk to me if they want help or just want to have a chat, etc. If you send me a screenshot of your team, I might just literally glance at it and go, yeah, it looks fine. And I'm not the best person to ask for that, because I've not got a huge amount of time, but I'll make time for people on a human level, 100%, always. And Dele's been incredibly brave to share a lot of his story, which hopefully inspires others to seek help. And Dele's done that, and that's the first thing of admitting a problem, is just putting your hands up sometimes and saying, look, I need some help. And amongst all the stories that were part of that yesterday, let's remember that at the start he said he's in the best place mentally that he's been in for a very long time. And I'd love nothing more than Dele to do very well at Everton, become a hero up there. Generally, I'd love to see him do well there. Wish him nothing but the best. He's a player and a human that will always retain a place in my heart, 100%. JHSUFC says, hi James, how do you think Chelsea will look under Poch? Tough to say as no pre-season games yet, but who would be your top 3 FP options for Chelsea as it stands? There's difficulty in that, because with someone like Christopher Nkunku, and also Nicholas Jackson. We're making assumptions on things that have happened for other teams, right? We've all been here in the Timo Werner boat. He's going to tear it up, and Kunku's price is even so much more attractive than obviously Werner's was. Going back to what's that, summer of 2020, I think. It doesn't feel that long ago, but I think it is. So we can only make assumptions on so many players at Chelsea at the moment. If I had to pick 3 right now, I mean, I wouldn't want to. I think starting with 3 is bad, because I think there's a lot to learn. If you want to start with a couple, fine. I'd leave at least one place open. And you'd also have to question whether you want 3 Chelsea players with a difficult game week 1, and there's West Ham away is a challenging game week 2 as well. But I can understand the appeal in terms of getting it ready for 3. If I had to go right now, I'd go on Kunku and Chilwell. I think Chilwell over James again is close enough that I'd go with a player with less ownership at the moment. I think that could really swing. And Kunku, I think, has big appeal. I spoke before saying I owned him in UCL Fantasy, and great assets to own. Owned him a lot, both for the last couple of years, and really good. So that has already given me an inner feeling. I think, well, I've had him in UCL Fantasy. He's performed well for me, so I have that experience. So it would be them 2. If I had to pick a 3rd right now, maybe Raheem Sterling as a punt, maybe, but I would not want to go for a 3rd at all right now. Sean says, who do you think will be the team to dethrone City, and how long is it going to take? It's probably one for Pep Guardiola to discuss, isn't it? Look, in terms of the immediate season, Arsenal maintain the most likely, in my opinion, to challenge that. I think next in line is Liverpool, purely because they have the capability, if it goes well for them, to put that stretch together where they go 7-8 wins in a row. The others don't, I think, have, Manchester United and Newcastle, I don't think have quite that capability yet to go 7-8 wins in a row. And at some point, if you want to overthrow this City, you've got to have a run like that at some sort of stage, like Arsenal did at the start of last season. So I think probably in terms of trying to win the league this year, it's difficult to look beyond Arsenal and Liverpool because of capability historically of being the 2 that are most likely to challenge. Sean says, also, do you think anything will actually come from these 115 charges against City? It seems beyond blatant to me at this point. In terms of what they've been up to, surely it can't be ignored again. I think large punishment is inevitable. And I can't foresee that being any smaller than the transfer embargo of sort of at least 12 months as probably the lightest punishment they're likely to get, I think, at this stage. I think points deductions is a very, very serious and real prospect for Manchester City, which is not something at the top end of the Premier League we've dealt. I think Portsmouth are the only team who've ever been deducted points in the Premier League era, I want to say. And that was for entering administration, so you're talking at completely different levels of the spectrum within the Premier League. I don't even think demotion is impossible. Now, I think I'm a stickler in terms of I really dislike the points deduction thing during the course of a season. And I think the Premier League will be keen to avoid that. So I think if the punishment is a points deduction, unless it's small, i.e. 2-3 points or something, I think it's something we would expect to hear about on the off-season, i.e. next summer. I would estimate, by the way, in terms of a resolution of when we should expect something on these City charges, whatever that is, I would suggest next summer probably at the very earliest, and I would say the summer after is probably more likely. It will genuinely, everybody has been saying, everybody in the know has been saying it's not going to be quick. It will be really long term. So if I was to estimate when we get a resolution, I would generally say 2 years from now. And I think it will be heavy for City. If it's transfer embargo, I think that will come with huge fine as well. Whether they have the ability to expulse them as a representative from European competition, I'm not sure. That's obviously UEFA did want to ban them from the Champions League. That didn't hold up in CAS, in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, because of time barring. The Premier League investigation has no time barring, which means they can investigate back for as long as they want to. And there has been new information that's come to light very recently as well with Manchester City. There was this video, was it the Times? I might have that wrong, so I kind of don't want to quote that. But I watched the video, and yeah, there's stuff there that's clearly wrong. Clearly wrong. There will be some form of punishment. We can only assume it and make assumptions at the moment, but like if you're expecting something soon, you know, if you're sitting there 15 points behind Liverpool, if you're a Liverpool fan, you're 15 points behind them in March and hoping they're going to get the 15-point deduction, like I wouldn't be hopeful. I generally think that because it's probably likely to be a sizable punishment, that it is something we're more likely to hear about in an off-season. And it will literally be, because it's being done by an independent commission, that it will literally be published on website. Here's your story. It's not going to be, when I say it might be 2 years, it's not going to be, we'll expect the decision next week, or the decision's going to be announced next week. It will be, bang, posted on website, and that'll be it. And the fallout from that will be what it will be. Adam says, will Havertz be a success at Arsenal? Depends. If Arsenal are buying, and we think they're buying Bayer Leverkusen Kai Havertz rather than Chelsea Kai Havertz, then sure, there's every chance. But I don't think we can ever look at any transfer and say that's a guarantee to be a success ever. So I've mixed views on it at the moment. I certainly think it could be. Let me say that. Rami says, what's for lunch? Well, if the weather stays as it is, it might be Nando's on an Uber Eats, because Nico's going away for the next couple of weeks. I promised to take him for lunch after this stream. So probably we're going to go somewhere, but he's lashing it down at the moment. So it might be like a Nando's on an Uber Eats or something. Romari9 says, Sky FPL winner question above, stress ball or 50k. It's so true, isn't it, mate? Rami says, and surely Foden has to have increased minutes this season. Do you think he's okay to start with? At the moment, Phil Foden's sitting in my draft at the moment, yeah. Very keen. It's obviously very subject to what we see over the next 3-4 weeks. I think there's certain players who, I'll give you an example. Take Mo, right? Say you're sitting there without Mo Salah at the moment. Now, what you have to ask yourself is, right, what's your reaction if Mo Salah, scores 12 goals in pre-season, for example? What are you going to do? So you almost want to ask yourself that question now. If you've got a clear plan and strategy, and you're going, right, I'm not going to go with Mo Salah, then almost before he goes off mad, because he's capable, right? He's friendlies. I always refer to the Tottenham 2008 example where we went absolutely mental in pre-season. We beat Roma 5-0, Celtic 3-0, Dortmund 3-0, Norwich 5-1, battering everyone. Darren Bent scored 13 goals. Crazy. We scored about 30 goals in pre-season. Won every game. And then the league season started, we took 2 points from 8 games. And we're bottom of the league. So, and that goes other ways. Like, reflect on Mourinho's last year at Chelsea and had a horrendous pre-season, didn't win a single game, and then started the Premier League season badly. So you can always spin the narratives with pre-season. But Mo Salah's last pre-season, I think Liverpool's last game's Darmstadt on a Monday night. If Mo Salah scores a hat-trick in that game, great. It's almost half expected. So prepare yourself. Whereas someone like Foden, where we're making assumptions already at this stage, De Bruyne might be injured, Gundogan's left. Does that have an impact in terms of increased minutes? Sure. But we now need to see where Pep intends to play him in pre-season. And we know that might change once the season starts, but we need something. So Phil Foden goes through pre-season and there doesn't look like there's a clear understanding that in game week 1 he's going to start, then we look at different options, don't we? We know what we're going to get from Mo Salah. It's just a case of, if you don't go with a Mo Salah, how badly does it hurt? Phil Foden, we need some sort of evidence to still start with him. But at the moment, yes, I'm extremely keen on Phil Foden. John Lloyd says, who's most nailed between Aki and Akanji? Again, let's see on pre-season. But if I have to answer that question right now, I think probably Nathan Aki is the more likely. Jeff says, hello, I'd like to ask James, what are the 3 best goals he's seen live scored by Spurs and 3 against Spurs? Look, I remember the goals scored by Spurs much better than goals scored against. I tend to block out a lot of the goals against. Best goals seen scored for Tottenham. I've got to put Sonny's in there, haven't I? Puskas Award winner, the goal against Burnley. at the new White Hart Lanes. I think that's got to be in there. I think Sonny's goal. The Stephen Carr goal against Manchester United, which I know he's just a hit, but he hit it like an arrow, and I was right in line from where he hit the shot to where it hit the net. It was like 30 yards out. As soon as he hit it, I knew he'd scored. So that one I always reflect on really well. Dele's goal at Palace is arguably the best goal ever scored by a Tottenham player, but I wasn't there. I wasn't at the stadium. And was a little reluctant to include that one. I love a goal Ginola scored in that same season as the year before but it was the same year, 1999. The goal he scored in the 5th round replay against Leeds, dropped him 25 yards out, and he just hit it on the volley in the run. And he'd hit the woodwork 2 or 3 times before that, and he just couldn't score. And this ball just dropped out the sky 25 yards out, and he's just gone, whack it, I'm going to lever it with everything I got. And it was one, it bounced before it went in, but to strike through a volley like that on the run and keep it down technically, magnificent. But it was like, remember Rooney's goal against Newcastle? It was similar like that for Manchester United when he was arguing with the ref. It was like he was angry and he just hit this volley like as hard as he could. The Rooney goal was better, but it was like that in the sense it was like anger and technique in the strike at the same time. So there's a few that come to mind. The Kane goal against Arsenal, the Mask goal, it's emotionally a lot. But I think the Dele goal against Palace is arguably, I think probably that and the Glenn Hoddle goal at Watford are probably the 2 best goals, and maybe Jimmy Greaves against Manchester United in the 60s are probably the 3 best goals ever scored by Tottenham players. But I wasn't at any of them. I certainly wasn't there in the 60s. I'm pretty sure my dad was, by the way. And I'm pretty sure he was at Watford when Hoddle scored the chip at Vicarage Road as well. But the Dele goal was right up there as arguably greatest ever Tottenham goal. But I wasn't there. So I'm probably going to say the Sonny goal, to be honest. Renarid9 says, how good is Mikey Moore, and what do you think best route through for him is? Loan to what league first? Loan to nowhere, mate. Right now, no. It's stay with the club and see if hopefully he can be on the fringes. Not ready for a loan yet, I think, and you need to be so careful with that. I'm very hopeful, Pete, that he'll play at Enfield Town on Tuesday night. It's the number one. I'm fingers crossed that he's going to play. He's an under 21 group, but we know there's probably a number of the under 21s might go with a full first team. So I'm quite hopeful I might see him at Enfield on Tuesday night. If you fancy it, let me know. Super talent, but again, those who listen to me for a long time will know I've told the tales about Marcus Edwards and stuff, and Enfield Town was the last place I saw him play, ironically, as well. Best player on the pitch, but laziest player on the pitch, and that was his problem. Mikey's got it all. He's the most talented player to come through at Tottenham since Marcus Edwards, but it's no guarantee to anything. But all the things you hear is great. He technically looks like he's got it all. It reminds me a little bit of a young Mason Mount, actually. And he might have the capability to be better. Matthew Derbyshire says, think I'll be playing Sky instead of FPL this year. Not got time for both, and Sky Pods have got me interested. Strange question, but any Sky content creators on top of yourselves that you'd recommend? I mean, obviously, I said Paul from the 3-for-1 podcast with Fergie won it. I think the Man On guys cover it. Golden Goal cover it. I don't know. Luke Williams obviously coming on with me on Wednesday. I don't think he's going to do anything this year. I know the Hub through the 3-for-1 guys have got I think Dan Cox writes on Hub and stuff as well, if you're subscribed to them, and Scout will cover something, even if it's just written format for Sky Fantasy as well. I would think, don't quote me on that. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, to be honest, if you literally just use the SkyFF hashtag on Twitter, you will quickly find the people who have Sky content out there. And there's lots. There's probably more than you're aware of, to be honest, Matt. Ryan Walker says, tempted to play Sky for the first time this year. Where's the best place to start? Specific pod or video? Cheers. So we've just done Season 5, Episode 2 of Sky Fantasy. The week before, we did Season 5, Episode 1, and it's called An Intro to Sky Fantasy, and it is literally designed for new players. So I have to recommend that podcast. It's 9 days old, so that's a great place to start. And the conversation on Wednesday's pod focused very much about what do we need, and that's taking the rules and the understanding of the format and then can't think of the right word. Implementing. I kept thinking amplifying. That's not right. Implementing what you need into a draft. Then we're going to look at how we work in the other bits and stuff as well. And we all end up with the same team. Not quite, but Sky is a game where you have to think about the template quite a lot. Nisha Hortop says Pulisic is gone. Yeah, that was a couple of days old news, isn't it? Gone officially to AC Milan, so no surprise on that. Gary Robinson says, morning James, what's happened to the new format? Heard anything? You're obsessed with this new format, mate. No one at FPL Towers tells me anything. I'm not in the ITK. I'm not with the crowd. You know, when you get asked for your drafts to put in a thread, I say no. I'd not heard anything. Generally, not a Scooby-Doo on the FPL's planned on a new format. I was hoping we might have something before Monday's podcast with Tom Campbell, but it doesn't look that way. Ryan Walker says, any thoughts on rumours Sellers' announcement at Reading? Looks like Walcott and Carroll will be our front line in League One. Yeah, I'd be a bit concerned about that, Ryan. We did a Money in Football podcast on Reading last week, where I know the embargoes have been lifted since we did that podcast, but we spoke about Theo Walcott quite a lot at length on that podcast. Theo Walcott was on £75,000 a week reported last season at Southampton, and I'd have to ask myself what he's on at Reading. And all Reading's financial troubles are linked back to expenditure on wages, which at several points have been 200% more than turnover, which is frightening. And that's why the football club's ended up. So if it's repeating the same mistakes and it's giving Walcott a decent salary, and by the way, that might be only 10-15% of what he's earned at Premier League level, then I'm very concerned. Will Theo Walcott do really well in League One? Is he a good signing from a football perspective? Sure, look, he played very well at the Emirates in April. I'm surprised if he's going to drop down to that level. So you have to ask yourself, why is he dropping down to that level? It's probably money, and it's probably too much money for what that football club can afford at the moment. It has made too many mistakes of giving players who have dropped from the top level salaries, big salaries. It's gambled. It gambled. We did a podcast on Reading on Patreon. Within the first 6 months of us starting Patreon, we called it the Royal Gamble. That was in the 2021 season. Reading won their first 4 games of the season, and we called it the Royal Gamble because we basically said that if they didn't get promoted that season, they were in big trouble because they'd gambled that heavily financially. They've not actually bought a player for a transfer fee since. Obviously went down and got relegated last year. So I'm concerned. Sure, Walcott and Carroll up front for Reading. On paper, it sounds great. I'm still very concerned for that football club. The owner is constantly being influenced. Atul Balaji says, is this a new room that you're using for recording this stream? No, it's basically a storage room for a lot of bags. So many of you may know, World Paper Bag Day the other day on Wednesday. By the way, World Fantasy Football Day is going to be July the 31st, and that's trademarked if anyone wants to copy that. We can all celebrate that together. July 31st, which is also when Correspondent Week starts. There's lots of bags in here from Sudge's Packaging Company of various branding that's been done for other companies. There's probably stuff in here that I did over the years, I should imagine. That's because the internet upstairs in the studio is not quite reliable enough at the moment, which is hence why I'm sitting down here in this room rather than sitting upstairs in the studio, if you were wondering. Garaf Ranjan says, hi James, Porro has been overlooked in the community. I've nailed in my team alongside Estupinan, Chile in back three. Do you think Emerson rotates with Porro and maybe Spence in the mix as well? Thanks. Well, here's the thing. He's nailed in your team. He's not nailed in your team if we don't think he's going to start, right? And I wouldn't guarantee it. There's a strong case to say at this moment that if he wants to invert the fullbacks, that Emerson Royal will be the most suitable for that job. Let's see what happens in the friendlies in the next couple of weeks. I cannot answer that question for you. I wouldn't rule out starting with Porro. Definitely wouldn't rule out starting with Destiny Udogie at 0.5 cheaper, by the way. So let's see what we see from Tottenham in the next few weeks. It's the positioning within possession of where the fullbacks go that's going to be absolutely critical to this. And we can only hypothesize. If they're going inverted into midfield, it's not that great. It doesn't appeal in the way that Trent does, I promise you. So it's more about where they end up. And I can't answer what the plans are as yet. And it might be that it's different by personnel, where if Emerson plays, he inverts. If Foro plays, he becomes the right-sided forward. Not too dissimilar to the role, ironically, he's been playing in the back three. There might be a lot of pressure on him to get forward very, very quickly. And of course, if that's the case, it's interesting. But we don't know the answer yet. I think we're going to find out pretty quickly. Andy Max says, hi James, TFI Friday. Do you think a flexible 4-5-1 works if you have a decent bench egg Visser instead of a 4.5 striker who can rotate? I spoke on one of the pods recently about not liking two 4.5s, just purely because, and I think, to be honest, like the best game week one team you could put together probably does have two 4.5 million forwards, but the template will move, and with that template movement normally becomes formation change as well, and it just becomes a little bit awkward, and you handicap yourself a little bit if you start that way. I would say someone like Visser, he's probably a little bit more on the expensive side of what you'd want, like 6 million forward, to actually be rotating. But I understand what you mean, because there are certain systems you look at and you think, I've got some money spare here and I'm not sure where else to spend it. I'm absolutely certain there's a few people have looked at drafts and gone, I don't mind this, but I've still got 1.5 million to spend. And it's not enough to get from like a Chilwell to a Trent. It's not enough to get from like a Saka to a Salah. It's not enough to get from a 4.5 to a decent forward. So you end up with that. Exactly that. Instead of a 4.5, a Visser. And I'd arguably rather just leave the money. But no, generally speaking, I think if it's lower, if you said to me, right, I want to rotate, let's say Chris Wood was going to be first choice for Forest, I'd almost rather you rotated that with at 5 million than a 6 million forward. But I get your point, Andy, and I think probably hearing me say about, I've got the 1.5 million spare, it's probably exactly what position you found yourself in, I would imagine. Mainly Minimal says, how do you think losing Henderson and Milner will affect Liverpool? Cheers, James. Well, look, the latest on Jordan Henderson is that nothing is certainly concluded at all with Al Ettifaq in Saudi Arabia. They want to get him on a free transfer, which I find quite bizarre, by the way. We want to give him £700,000 a week, which is take him 10 weeks to earn 7 million. So let's call 10 million. It's taking about 12, 13 weeks. But I don't want to give Liverpool a 10 million transfer fee. I haven't quite worked that out yet when there's no FFP restrictions on that sort of club at the moment. But the leadership side of things, can't be understated. Jordan Henderson, particularly, I think, has been absolutely pivotal in terms of being an on-field presence for Liverpool in some very difficult moments over the last few years. And even the very best team, the 1920, he was very important. Very important when they had the odd moment. Jordan Henderson leading them was very important. So look, it's up to others to step up and become new leaders within that team, for example. But my instinct is that, that's potentially a problem. Who becomes captain? Van Dijk? Salah? Trent? Is it Robertson? It'd almost make a case that Robertson might therefore be the natural leader possibly from that group. But then I don't even think... I've seen Liverpool linked to a number of left-sided centre-backs recently, and it's made me wonder if even... That means Andy Robertson is no longer a first-choice starter. And yes, there is a link between a left-sided centre-back and Andy Robertson in terms of what Liverpool want to do now with Trent. So, I think it's potentially problematic, if I'm totally honest. It might be better on pitch, but, that leadership's... It's been a problem for Tottenham last few years. And I think even, like for Arsenal under Emery, we often speak about Emery being wrong place, wrong time. Like the leadership in that Arsenal team is like non-existent. Now you've got this group coming through who do act like leaders, which, to be fair, Granit Xhaka has been quite a big part of that. Jeff says, as a Luton fan, it's just great to be in the top flight. I'm old enough to remember our 1987 7th place finish and a 3-1 win versus Liverpool at Kenilworth Road. JFPL says, afternoon, James. If Kane stays at Tottenham his whole career, then no doubt he'll break the Prem goal scoring record. Do you think he could break Jimmy Greaves' top flight goal record? Needs 145 to beat it. No, you're looking at basically another 5 30-goal seasons. I think that's too much. And I don't even think he's a certainty to break Shearer's record if he stays, to be honest. I think that's the recent narrative, 30 goals. But, before that, what was it, 14 or 15? And we know that the first half of that season didn't particularly turn up. But and he takes a bad injury, missed 2-3 months somewhere. There's no guarantee, even if he stayed at Tottenham or even if he moved to a Manchester United next summer, for example. I don't think it's a guarantee to break Shearer's record. That Jimmy Greaves record, it truly needs like a Haaland to stay at City for 8-9 years or so, I think. To get near that, I wouldn't be surprised if that record is, or it needs a Messi or Ronaldo to take over the league, if you will, right, and stay long enough so to break it. So I don't think Harry Kane will get near that. I mean, if he does, my God, then you're in debates of, generally all-time greatest English forward, which I guess is England's greatest ever goal scorer is obviously in that conversation. But I mean, in terms of top division, he wouldn't just be is he in the Premier League's all-time best 11? It becomes is he in the greatest football league team of all time, for example. George Hansin Koladis, sorry if I mispronounced that, says, is gambling with Chelsea attack worth it? I'm licking my lips with Sterling at 7. I'm going to skip it because we've done quite a bit of Chelsea already, but I think the pre-season is quite important. If Raheem Sterling looks like a prospect in pre-season, I certainly won't rule out going with him. Yes, it is potentially exciting at 7 million. FPL Glasto says, what's your current thinking on squad shape? I've always been a 3-4-3 kind of manager, but pricing sees me considering 4-4-2 or 3-5-2. Yeah, it could be. The 4 at the back looks like it might be the best way to make the money work. And of course, the danger is you do comparisons, right? Once you start thinking Trent Martinelli, I was thinking about this morning, Trent versus Martinelli. I mean, it's close, right? What do you get with Trent that you don't get with Martinelli? Minutes, more assured minutes. We also spoke on one of the pods earlier in the week. What do Liverpool do if Trent was injured? There's not many other complaints. If Liverpool are going to continue with that role with him coming in from right back into midfield, who else can do it? And there probably are a couple, but it means it's not often they're going to go without Trent. Martinelli with the Champions League starting up has that real rotational threat, I think. And at the moment, it's Martinelli sitting in my draft currently rather than a Trent, for example. But once you start thinking about these things and you do the comparison defence and midfield, quite often the logical answer is to go with the defender. So Visser's a name that's come up a couple of times here, 6 million. Like, do we think that Visser outscores Van Dijk as an example? Probably not when we break it down like that, right? Now, Van Dijk might not be the best choice. You can get Konate for $1 million cheaper, or you go up, obviously, 2 for Trent. But it's that when you start doing that sort of comparison between positions, quite often you go, the logical answer, it might be the defensive player. Right, I'm going to cover 4 more because I'm coming up to an hour. I'm conscious of time, so please don't submit any more questions. Nick Griffith says, how could Fulham losing potentially both Willian and Mitrovic affect their squad and credentials going into this season? But Solomon lost as well. So that's why I think there's a little bit of concern of Fulham at the moment. There was a lot reporting yesterday that Willian was having a medical at Nottingham Forest and he'd had talks. Then there's other journalists saying he's not even had talks, but Forest are interested, potentially offering 2 years rather than Fulham's 1 year. Mitrovic has probably had his head turned, which is concerning. And Fulham will need to get to the bottom of that and convince him to stay or get as much money as they can for him. The money being mentioned is not his valuation, by the way. Fulham will want a lot more, about 25 million. I don't see any way Fulham sell for that money unless there's a threat of the player going on strike or something. But I'm sure Fulham will replace. It's one of them, you get these. Mitrovic is leaving. Oh my God. Carlos Vinicius is this price. Yeah, Fulham will probably get someone else. Okay. And I imagine Fulham will still invest in the squad. I don't think there's a reason necessarily to stop Fulham investing, particularly if they're removing some of those wages from their expenditure. So I think Fulham will add. There's a few clubs have been a bit slow at the moment. Palace, West Ham, partly maybe because of the Declan Rice money. Not alone in that. So it's still a month to go. Fulham will be right, I think. Look, year 2, second season syndrome and all that, right? Always has its challenges, but Brentford showed last year that you can get it right. I think the manager's very astute, Marco Silva, so I think Fulham will be all right. Yes, if these players go, then there needs to be a bit of investment. Austin Lady says, hi James, wondering if there are any football myths, conspiracy theories that you believe in. For example, Ronaldo was poisoned by France before the 1998 World Cup final. No, never heard that. I genuinely have never heard that. No, wow. No, I don't. Certainly Argentina 1978. Yeah. Rigged, I think, unfortunately. So that's one. But I think most of them are in the past. Touch wood. Andy Max says, which sub 6 million midfielder strikers do you think will emerge as enablers? Who's on the watch list? I think that the two at Brighton, João Pedro and Julian Ciso, at 5.5 across those two positions, are the two that stand out as early ones that, he's doing well. Yeah, could be. So I think those two at the moment. And Headley M says, what's thoughts on Onana if 5 million over Shaw could be a BPS magnet? That's based on assumption of completed passes, I think, but let's not pretend that Edison's and Alisson's and other keepers don't complete passes. So don't necessarily read too much into that. But yes, Onana at 5 million would be very interested. And I think people have made that observation because Ramsdale's 5. It feels logical that Onana will be 5 as well. Right, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much. Sorry I didn't get through to all of those on the questions, but hopefully there's enough there to keep you occupied and for further discussion. Suj is away next week, so some different stuff next week. Tom Campbell's joining me for the main podcast on Monday, which we're pre-recording on Sunday nights. Keep an eye out for questions probably quite early on Sunday. Tom will be hosting that and I'll be answering. What we've done normally in the past is Tom's come up with questions and I don't know what's coming, and the theme is what's new. So that's in Tom's capable hands in terms of what's going to happen for Monday's pod. On Tuesday, I'm delighted to say one of our patrons, Lauren Harris, is joining me for a Women's World Cup preview. That tournament starts next Thursday, so that'll be available for you on Tuesday. Lauren did an absolutely brilliant podcast with us on Patreon last year before the Women's Euros started as well, and I'm delighted to introduce Lauren too. Is one of my favourite podcasts I ever recorded on Patreon. She's absolutely brilliant and thoroughly knowledgeable about the women's game. Wednesday, Luke Williams joining me for Sky Fantasy Football. Thursday, Clayton will be back for the transfer window show, and Ask James is likely to be same time next week. If you want to support the show, you can. www.patreon.com/Planet FPL. Returns to a more normal theme next week, which Clayton will be on the majority of the podcast with me, include Q&A, Tottenham Arse instead of Tottenham. Money in Football, one of our patrons, Chris Church, is joining me for on Manchester United next Thursday on Patreon. I think we're going to do a quiz on Tuesday with Clayton, and next Friday James Wilson is joining me for a podcast we've had planned for a very long time about mental health, which obviously seems very apt at the moment, and I say it's been planned for a long time because it's not off the back of what's happened with Dele. It's been planned for a long time, but does also feel more important after the overlap show with Gary Neville yesterday. But just leaves me to say thanks very much to everybody who's been live on the stream and contributed to the questions. Smash a like, hit the sub button, and for the benefit of those on the audio, cue music please, Manchild.